During dinner, my granddaughter let it slip. "Mommy, when are you taking Grandma to the nursing home?" My daughter-in-law tried to hush her. I just walked out in silence. 3 days later, she received a letter that made her drop to her knees. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I should have known something was wrong when Sadie insisted on cooking dinner herself that Tuesday evening. In the 3 years since I'd been living with my son Andrew and his wife, she'd never once offered to prepare a family meal. That was always my job, along with the cleaning, the laundry, and watching 8-year-old Bella after school. But there I was, sitting at my own dining table like a guest, watching my daughter-in-law bustle around the kitchen with an unusual spring in her step. She'd even set the table with the good china, the set I'd given them as a wedding gift 10 years ago. "Grandma Ellen, you look pretty tonight," Bella said, climbing onto the chair beside me. Her blonde curls bounced as she settled in, and I couldn't help but smile at her innocent compliment. "Thank you, sweetheart," I replied, smoothing down my navy cardigan. I'd actually made an effort tonight, sensing something special was happening, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Andrew walked in from his home office, loosening his tie with one hand while scrolling through his phone with the other. At 35, he still had that distracted look he'd worn since childhood, always somewhere else in his mind. "Smells good in here," he said absently, barely glancing up from his screen. Sadie beamed at the compliment, setting down a casserole dish with a flourish. "I thought we could have a nice family dinner for once. It's been too long since we all sat down together." I felt a flutter of warmth in my chest. Maybe I'd been too hard on Sadie lately. Perhaps she was finally making an effort to include me, to make me feel like part of the family rather than an unwelcome houseguest. We filled our plates in relative silence, the kind of comfortable quiet that settles over families during weeknight dinners. Bella chattered about her day at school, telling us about her art project and how Tommy Henderson had gotten in trouble for pulling Sarah's pigtails. "And then Mrs. Martinez said we're going to start learning about family trees next week," Bella continued, taking a bite of her green beans. "I told her I have the biggest family because I live with Mommy and Daddy and Grandma Ellen all in the same house." I smiled at that, reaching over to tuck a curl behind her ear. "That's right, sweetheart. We're all one big family." But as I said those words, I noticed something. Andrew and Sadie exchanged a look across the table. One of those quick glances that married couples share when they're communicating without words. My stomach tightened slightly, though I couldn't say why. "Bella, eat your chicken," Sadie said, her voice carrying a note of tension that hadn't been there moments before. The conversation continued, but I found myself studying my son and daughter-in-law more carefully. There was something different about them tonight, an undercurrent of anticipation that made me uneasy. They kept looking at each other, then at me, then quickly away. It was during dessert that everything changed. Bella was enjoying her ice cream, vanilla with rainbow sprinkles, when she suddenly looked up at her mother with those bright blue eyes full of innocent curiosity. "Mommy," she said, her small voice cutting through the evening air like a knife, "when are you going to take Grandma Ellen to the old people's home?" The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against my bowl with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. My heart stopped beating for what felt like an eternity, then started again with a painful thud. Sadie's face went white, then red. "Bella, honey, don't." "But you said," Bella continued, confusion written across her innocent features. "That's enough," Andrew said sharply, his voice cutting through his daughter's words. But the damage was already done. I sat there, frozen, as the full weight of what I'd just heard settled over me like a heavy blanket. They'd been discussing this, planning it, and they'd done it openly enough that an 8-year-old child knew about it. "Ellen, it's not what you think," Sadie started, but her words sounded hollow, desperate. I looked at my son, waiting for him to say something to defend me, to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. But Andrew wouldn't meet my eyes. He just sat there, jaw clenched, staring down at his half-eaten dessert. The silence stretched on, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Bella looked between the adults, finally understanding that she'd said something wrong, though she clearly didn't know what. "Did I say something bad?" she whispered. I found my voice then, though it came out smaller than I intended. "No, sweetheart. You didn't say anything bad." But inside I was crumbling. This was my home. I'd helped them buy this house, contributed my monthly Social Security checks to the mortgage payments for 3 years. I'd raised my grandson while they both worked, cooked their meals, maintained their household. And this was how they saw me, as a problem to be solved, a burden to be removed. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I gripped the back of my chair for support. "Mom, please sit down," Andrew finally spoke, but his voice lacked conviction. "Let's talk about this." "Talk about what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "About how you've been planning to put me in a home behind my back. About how my own granddaughter knows more about my future than I do." Sadie opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I couldn't listen to whatever excuse she was prepared to offer. Not tonight. Not when the betrayal was still so fresh, so raw. I walked around the table, stopping beside Bella's chair. She looked up at me with those wide, worried eyes, and I forced myself to smile for her sake. "I love you, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Don't ever forget that." Then I walked out of the dining room, through the living room, and up the stairs to my bedroom. Each step felt like I was climbing a mountain, the weight of what I discovered pressing down on my shoulders. Behind me, I could hear Sadie's voice, sharp with panic. "You need to go talk to her, Andrew. Fix this." But my son's response was quiet, resigned. What am I supposed to say? She was going to find out eventually. I closed my bedroom door and leaned against it, my chest heaving as if I'd run a marathon. The room that had been my sanctuary for 3 years suddenly felt like a prison cell. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every small comfort I'd arranged to make this space my own now felt temporary, meaningless. I walked to my dresser and stared at my reflection in the mirror. At 69, I looked older than my years tonight. The lines around my eyes seemed deeper, my gray hair thinner. When had I become such a burden? When had caring for me become such an inconvenience that they needed to discuss it like a business transaction? Outside my door, I could hear movement, hushed conversations, the sound of dishes being cleared. Life going on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. In one innocent question from a child, my entire world had shifted off its axis. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands folded in my lap, and tried to process what I'd learned. They wanted me gone. The 2 people I'd sacrificed everything for, the family I'd helped build and support, were planning to ship me off to some facility where I'd become someone else's problem. The worst part wasn't even their betrayal. It was the realization that they'd been discussing this so casually, so openly, that Bella had absorbed it as simply another family decision, like choosing a vacation destination or deciding what to have for dinner. As I sat there in the growing darkness, one thought kept echoing in my mind. If they wanted me gone so badly, perhaps it was time to give them exactly what they wanted, but not in the way they expected. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Bella's innocent voice asking about the old people's home. By 5 in the morning, I gave up trying and made my way downstairs to start the coffee, my usual routine for the past 3 years. The house was silent, wrapped in that peculiar quiet that comes just before dawn. I moved through the kitchen mechanically, measuring coffee grounds, filling the machine with water, all while my mind churned with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Andrew found me there an hour later, sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup, staring out the window at the garden I'd helped plant last spring. "Mom," he said, his voice careful, measured. "We need to talk." I didn't look at him. "Do we? Or have you and Sadie already made all the decisions that need to be made?" He pulled out the chair across from me, the same chair where he'd sat as a boy while I helped him with homework, where we'd shared countless breakfasts before school. Now it felt like there was an ocean between us. "It's not like that," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Then what is it like, Andrew?" I finally met his eyes, and I saw my own son flinch at whatever he saw in my face. "Please explain to me how my 8-year-old granddaughter knows about plans for my future that I've never been consulted about." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was caught in trouble. "Sadie was just... We were just discussing options. Hypothetically. Hypothetically." I repeated the word, tasting its bitterness. And these hypothetical discussions happened often enough that Bella absorbed them as fact? Andrew opened his mouth, then closed it again. We both knew there was no good answer to that question. "I need to get ready for work," he finally said, standing up abruptly. We'll continue this conversation tonight. But I knew we wouldn't. Andrew had been avoiding difficult conversations his entire life, and I'd always let him. Always smoothed things over, made excuses, cleaned up the messes. Just like I'd been doing with his household for 3 years. After he left, I found myself alone in the house. Sadie had taken Bella to school, and wouldn't be back until after her part-time job at the boutique. For the first time in months, I had the house completely to myself. That's when I decided to do something I'd never done before. I went looking for the truth. I started in Andrew's home office, the converted spare bedroom where he spent most evenings working, though I often heard the sounds of video games through the door. I felt guilty at first, rifling through his desk drawers, but that guilt quickly evaporated when I found what I was looking for. Tucked beneath a stack of old bills was a folder labeled Senior Living Options. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were brochures, dozens of them. Sunny Acres Retirement Community, Golden Years Care Facility, Meadowbrook Senior Living. Each one featured the same stock photos of smiling elderly people playing cards, tending gardens, participating in arts and crafts. But it was the handwritten notes in the margins that made my blood run cold. Accepts Medicaid after 2 years private pay. Memory care wing available. Shared rooms reduce costs significantly. At the bottom of one brochure in Sadie's neat handwriting, waiting list, put mom on it ASAP. I sank into Andrew's desk chair, the folder sliding from my numb fingers. They weren't just discussing this hypothetically. They were actively planning it. Making lists, calling facilities, getting prices. But there was more. I found a legal pad with what appeared to be a budget calculation. At the top, in Andrew's messy scrawl, monthly expenses without mom's contribution. Below that, a list that made my stomach turn. Mortgage, $2,400. Utilities, $350. Groceries, $600. Car payments, $780. Insurance, $450. Bella's activities, $200. At the bottom, total, $4,780. Current household income, $5,200. Difference, $420. But then in red ink another calculation. Mom's Social Security, $1,400. Mom's pension, $800. Total contribution, $2,200. And finally the line that shattered what was left of my heart. Net loss without mom, $1,780 per month. I stared at those numbers, understanding flooding over me like ice water. They weren't keeping me around out of love or obligation. They were keeping me around because they needed my money. But somehow even that wasn't enough anymore. The burden of my presence had apparently outweighed the financial benefit. My hands shaking, I kept digging through the folder. There were more notes, phone numbers for social workers, information about transitioning elderly family members to appropriate care. And then I found the email. It was printed out, dated just 3 days ago, from Sadie's email account to someone named Jennifer Morris at Sunny Acres. Jennifer, thank you for the tour last week. We've decided to move forward with placing my mother-in-law in your facility. As discussed, she has early signs of memory issues and can become confused and agitated. We believe she would benefit from professional care rather than trying to manage her needs at home. Please let me know what paperwork needs to be completed to move forward with admission. Memory issues. Confused and agitated. I read the words twice, 3 times, unable to believe what I was seeing. I was sitting right there, reading their correspondence about me, my mind as sharp as it had ever been. They were lying, creating a narrative that would justify their decision to put me away. I heard the front door open downstairs and quickly shoved everything back into the folder, placing it exactly where I'd found it. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it might give me away as I hurried back to the kitchen. Ellen! Sadie's voice called out. I'm back. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the October wind, her makeup flawless. She looked so normal, so innocent, that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined what I just discovered. How are you feeling today? She asked, and I could hear it now, the slight emphasis on the word feeling. The careful tone people use when they're talking to someone they consider fragile. I'm fine. I said, my voice steadier than I expected. She studied my face with those calculating blue eyes. You look tired. Maybe you should rest this afternoon. Rest. Of course. The confused, agitated elderly woman should rest. Should stay out of the way while the capable adults made decisions about her future. Actually, I think I'll go for a walk, I said, reaching for my sweater. Get some fresh air. I saw a flicker of something cross her face. Annoyance? Concern that I might wander off and embarrass them? Are you sure that's a good idea? The sidewalks can be uneven. And you know how your balance has been lately. My balance was fine. It had always been fine. But I was beginning to understand the game now. Every stumble, every moment of normal human forgetfulness, every sign of aging was being catalogued and exaggerated to build their case. I'll be careful, I said, wrapping my sweater around my shoulders. Outside, the cool air helped clear my head. I walked slowly through the neighborhood I'd come to know so well. Past the houses where I'd chatted with neighbors, where I'd watched Bella play with friends, where I'd felt like I belonged. But now I saw it all differently. This wasn't my neighborhood. This wasn't my home. I was just a temporary resident, tolerated as long as I was useful, discarded when I became inconvenient. By the time I returned to the house, I'd made a decision. If Andrew and Sadie wanted to play games, if they wanted to create narratives and make plans behind my back, then I could play games too. But I was going to win. That evening at dinner, I watched them carefully. I noticed how Sadie guided the conversation away from anything that might upset me, how Andrew spoke to me in that slightly louder voice people use with the elderly, how they both seemed to be performing their roles as the caring, concerned family members. How was your walk today, Mom? Andrew asked. Lovely, I replied, smiling sweetly, though I did get a bit turned around coming home. Took me a few extra minutes to remember which street was ours. It was a lie, but I watched their faces carefully as I said it. I saw the look that passed between them, the satisfied nod, the mental note being made. Confused and agitated indeed. After dinner, I helped Sadie clear the table, playing my part as the helpful but slightly befuddled grandmother. When she wasn't looking, I made sure to put one of the good plates in the wrong cabinet, where she'd find it later and chalk it up to my declining mental state. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and planned my next move. They thought they were so clever, so careful in their manipulations. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me completely. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in over 20 years. I called in sick to my volunteer work at the hospital gift shop. I'm feeling a bit under the weather, I told Margaret, the volunteer coordinator, my voice appropriately frail. I think I should stay home and rest. Of course, Ellen. Take care of yourself. We'll see you when you're feeling better. After Andrew left for work and Sadie dropped Bella at school, I had my first real opportunity to put my plan into motion. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I returned to Andrew's office, this time armed with a small notebook and pen. I methodically went through every document in that folder, taking careful notes. Phone numbers, contact names, dates, amounts. I even found a timeline in Sadie's handwriting that made my blood boil. October 15th initial facility tour. October 22nd submit application. November 1st follow-up call. November 15th target move-in date. November 15th. Less than 3 weeks away. They'd planned this down to the day, and I'd been completely oblivious. But the most revealing document was tucked behind all the others. A printed email from Andrew to his sister Patricia in Denver, dated just 5 days ago. Pat, I know it's been a while since we talked, but I wanted to give you a heads up about Mom. Sadie and I have decided it's time to move her to a care facility. Her memory has been getting worse and frankly, it's becoming too much for us to handle. Bella's getting scared because Grandma gets confused and sometimes doesn't recognize her. Last week she left the stove on all night. We're worried about everyone's safety. I know you'll probably think we're being heartless, but we've tried everything. The facility we've chosen is really nice, and she'll get the professional care she needs. I'll call you after we get her settled. I had to read it 3 times before the full impact hit me. Every single word was a lie. My memory was fine. I'd never failed to recognize Bella. I'd never left the stove on. I was obsessively careful about things like that. A habit from my years of raising Andrew alone after his father died. But this email wasn't just lies told to make himself feel better. This was Andrew preparing his sister for what was coming, creating a narrative that would prevent any family interference. Patricia lived 2,000 miles away. She'd have no way of knowing the truth. By the time she realized what had really happened, it would be too late. I copied down Patricia's email address and phone number, then carefully returned everything to its original position. My hands were steadier now, my mind clearer than it had been in days. Anger, I realized, was much more useful than hurt. My next stop was the kitchen telephone, where I dialed a number I'd memorized years ago but never thought I'd need. Brennan and Associates Law Firm, this is Jessica speaking. Hello, I'd like to schedule an appointment with Mr. Brennan. It's regarding estate planning and property law. Certainly. What's your name? Ellen Morrison. And Jessica? I need to see him today if possible. It's urgent. 3 hours later, I sat across from Thomas Brennan in his downtown office, my purse clutched tightly in my lap. At 72, Tom was only a few years older than me, but he'd been practicing law for nearly 5 decades. More importantly, he'd been my late husband's best friend. Ellen, I have to say, you sounded quite urgent on the phone. What's going on? I'd rehearsed this conversation during the drive downtown, but sitting there in his comfortable office, looking at photos of his grandchildren on his desk, the words came easier than I'd expected. Tom, I need to ask you about property rights. If someone is living in a house, contributing to the mortgage payments, but their name isn't on the deed, what rights do they have? His bushy gray eyebrows drew together in concern. Well, that depends on several factors. How long have they been contributing? Do they have documentation of their payments? Has there been any written agreement? I opened my purse and pulled out a manila folder I prepared that morning. I've been living with my son Andrew and his wife for 3 years. I've contributed my entire Social Security check and pension to their household expenses, specifically the mortgage. I have bank records showing electronic transfers of $2,200 every month. Tom's expression grew more serious as he looked through my documentation. Ellen, this is substantial. Over 3 years, you're talking about nearly $80,000 in contributions. $79,200 to be exact. And your name isn't on the mortgage or deed? No. Andrew said it would be easier for tax purposes if everything stayed in their names. I trusted him. Tom leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Ellen, forgive me for asking, but why are you here today? Has something happened? This was the moment I'd been dreading, but I forced myself to speak calmly, factually. They're planning to put me in a nursing home, Tom. Against my will. They've been making arrangements behind my back. And they've been telling people that I have memory problems and confusion issues to justify their decision. Do you have memory problems? You tell me. I've just recited exact financial figures from a 3-year period. I drove myself here through downtown traffic, and I'm sitting here having a coherent conversation about complex legal matters. A small smile crossed his face. Point taken. Ellen, what exactly are you asking me to do? I took a deep breath. I want to know my options. All of them. Over the next hour, Tom explained the legal realities of my situation. As someone who had contributed substantially to a property over an extended period, I had what was called an equitable interest in the home. It wasn't ownership exactly, but it gave me certain rights. The most straightforward approach would be to demand repayment of your contributions, he explained. $79,000 plus interest. If they can't pay immediately, which I suspect they can't, you could potentially force a sale of the property. And if I don't want the money back? If I want something else? Tom's eyes sharpened with interest. What did you have in mind? I want them to understand what it feels like to have their security pulled out from under them. I want them to experience the fear and uncertainty they've been planning to put me through. Ellen, I've known you for 30 years, and I've never heard you talk like this. 30 years ago, I never thought my own son would try to warehouse me so he could steal my home. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. There is another option. Given your substantial financial contribution and the length of your residency, we could argue that you have a right to remain in the property. We could seek an injunction preventing them from forcing you to leave. Would that work? Possibly. But Ellen, are you sure you want to stay in a house where you're not wanted? I considered that question carefully. Tom, 3 days ago I would have said no. I would have just quietly accepted whatever they decided and tried to make the best of it. But they've been lying about me, creating false narratives about my mental state to justify their actions. They've involved my granddaughter in their schemes, and they've been planning this for months while smiling to my face every day. I stood up, my decision crystallizing as I spoke. I don't want to stay in their house, Tom, but I want them to understand that they can't just dispose of people when they become inconvenient. I want them to face consequences for their choices. What are you proposing? I want to exercise my right to demand immediate repayment of my contributions. All of it. And I want to give them exactly as much notice as they plan to give me. Tom smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like someone was on my side. Ellen, I think that can be arranged. How much notice were they planning to give you? I thought about the timeline I'd found in Sadie's handwriting. Based on their documents, about 48 hours. Then 48 hours it is. We spent another hour drafting a formal demand letter. Tom explained that he would send it via certified mail and email to ensure there was no question about when they received it. The letter would demand full repayment of my contributions within 48 hours, and if they couldn't pay, I would be forced to pursue legal remedies that could include liens on the property or forced sale. There's one more thing, I said as we finished. I want to move out before they receive this letter. I don't want to be there when they realize what's happening. Do you have somewhere to go? I smiled for the first time all day. I've been looking at apartments online. Amazing what you can afford when you're not supporting ungrateful relatives. That evening I played my part perfectly. I was slightly more forgetful at dinner, asking Sadie to repeat something she'd said, looking confused when Andrew mentioned a movie we'd watched together just last week. I saw them exchanging those meaningful glances again, saw the satisfaction in their eyes as they mentally documented my decline. After dinner I helped clean up, making sure to put the silverware in the wrong drawer. Small things, but I knew Sadie would find them later and add them to her growing list of evidence. Mom, you seem tired tonight, Andrew said, his voice full of false concern. Maybe you should get some rest. You're probably right, I agreed, playing the compliant elderly woman. I do feel a bit confused today. As I headed upstairs, I heard Sadie whisper to Andrew, "It's getting worse. I think we need to move faster on this." In my room, I quietly began packing. Not everything, just the essentials and the things that meant the most to me. My photo albums, my jewelry, my important documents. I worked carefully, methodically, folding clothes into suitcases I'd retrieved from the basement that afternoon. Tomorrow, while they were at work and school, I would finish packing and move to the furnished apartment I'd rented online. I'd leave everything ready for Tom's letter to arrive. And then Andrew and Sadie would learn what it felt like when the people you trust most pull the rug out from under you. As I folded my nightgowns into the suitcase, I found myself thinking about Bella. She was the innocent victim in all of this, and leaving her would be the hardest part. But I couldn't protect her from the truth forever, and maybe it was better for her to learn now that actions have consequences, even for parents. Especially for parents. The moving truck arrived at exactly 9 a.m., just 30 minutes after Andrew left for work, and Sadie departed with Bella for school. I timed everything perfectly. I hadn't slept much the night before, but I felt more energized than I had in months. There's something clarifying about making a decision after weeks of uncertainty, something powerful about taking control of your own narrative. The two young men from the moving company were efficient and respectful. I directed them to pack only my personal belongings, the furniture I'd brought with me 3 years ago, and a few pieces that had been wedding gifts to Andrew and me that I'd given to him after his marriage. Legally, those items were still mine. "You sure you don't want the dining room set, ma'am?" asked Jake, the taller of the two movers. "It's beautiful." I looked at the mahogany table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd helped Bella with homework, where just 3 nights ago my world had collapsed over dessert. "No," I said firmly. "Leave it." By noon, the house looked strangely empty. Not completely empty, but hollow in a way that would be immediately noticeable. The living room furniture remained, but the antique lamp that had been my mother's was gone. The kitchen still functioned, but the stand mixer I'd used to bake countless birthday cakes had been packed away. Small absences that would speak volumes. I saved the most important task for last. In the center of the kitchen table, I placed 3 envelopes. One addressed to Andrew, one to Sadie, and one to Bella. Beside them, I left Tom Brennan's business card and a copy of the legal demand letter that would arrive by certified mail later that day. But it was the fourth item that gave me the most satisfaction. A printed copy of the email Andrew had sent to his sister Patricia, with a handwritten note attached. I thought you should know what your brother really thinks of your intelligence. I'd already called Patricia myself that morning. That conversation had been enlightening. Patricia, this is your stepmother Ellen. I know we haven't spoken in years, but I thought you should know that Andrew has been telling people I have severe memory problems, and that I'm becoming dangerous to live with. What? Ellen, that's ridiculous. You sound perfectly fine to me. That's because I am perfectly fine. But Andrew and Sadie want to put me in a nursing home so they can keep the house I've been paying for. And they needed a story that would prevent family interference. The silence on the other end of the line had been deafening. Then Patricia had said something that made my day. Ellen, I am so sorry. And I am going to call my brother right now. Actually, Patricia, would you mind waiting until this evening? I have something I need to do first. Now looking around the house one final time, I felt a strange sense of peace. I wasn't running away. I wasn't being driven out. I was making a choice on my terms with my dignity intact. I picked up my purse and walked toward the front door, then stopped. There was one more thing I needed to do. I pulled out my phone and composed a text message to Andrew. Having lunch with my friend Margaret from the hospital. We'll be home by dinner. Love, Mom. Then I turned off my phone, got into the taxi I'd called, and gave the driver the address of my new apartment. The Sunset Manor apartments weren't fancy, but they were clean, safe, and designed specifically for active seniors. My one-bedroom unit was on the third floor with a lovely view of the community garden. It was smaller than what I'd been used to, but it was mine. As the movers brought in my belongings, I felt like I was seeing them with new eyes. The rocking chair my husband had given me for our first anniversary. The bookshelf where I kept my collection of mystery novels. The cedar chest full of baby clothes and quilts I'd made for grandchildren I'd hoped to have closer relationships with. Where do you want this, ma'am? Jake asked, carrying in my jewelry box. On the dresser in the bedroom, please. By 3 o'clock, everything was in place. The apartment felt like home in a way Andrew's house hadn't for months. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my rocking chair by the window, watching other residents tend to the garden below. At exactly 4:15, I turned my phone back on. The messages started coming immediately. 7 missed calls from Andrew. 15 text messages. 3 voicemails. I ignored them all and called Tom Brennan instead. Ellen, I was just about to call you. The certified letter was delivered an hour ago. Andrew signed for it personally. Good. And the email copy. Sent at the same time as the letter. He's received both by now. Thank you, Tom. For everything. Ellen, are you sure you're ready for what comes next? They're not going to take this quietly. I looked around my small, peaceful apartment. Tom, I've spent 3 years trying to be the perfect houseguest, the grateful mother, the compliant elderly woman. It got me nowhere except planned for disposal. I think it's time they learned that I'm not as helpless as they assumed. As if summoned by my words, my phone rang. Andrew's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. 20 minutes later, I finally listened to his messages. The progression was fascinating to observe. Message 1 recorded at 4:20. Mom, where are you? Sadie's home and she said your things are gone. Call me immediately. Message 2 for 35. Mom, I got some crazy legal letter today. I don't understand what's happening. Please call me so we can work this out. Message 3 for 50. Mom, I know you're upset about the other night, but this is insane. You can't just disappear. Bella's crying. Call me back. And finally message 4 recorded just 10 minutes ago. Fine. If this is how you want to play it, then we'll play it. You've made a huge mistake, Mom. Huge. We'll see how long you can afford to live on your own without our help. That last message made me smile. There it was, the real Andrew. Not the concerned son, not the dutiful caregiver, but the angry man who'd been caught in his own web of lies and manipulation. I saved all the messages, then called Tom back. Tom, I need you to hear something. I played Andrew's 4th message over the phone. Well, Tom said when it finished. I think that message just became evidence of financial abuse. Without our help. Ellen, you were the one providing the help. That's exactly what I thought you'd say. At 6 o'clock, as I was heating up soup for dinner, my phone rang again. This time it was Sadie. I answered on the fourth ring. Ellen? Ellen, where are you? We're worried sick. Her voice was shaky, on the edge of tears. But I could hear the calculation behind the emotion. The careful choice of words designed to make me feel guilty. I'm fine, Sadie. I'm exactly where I need to be. Where is that? Ellen, please just come home. We can work this out. Home. I laughed, and it felt good to let the humor show. Sadie, that was never my home. That was your house that I was paying rent on. There's a difference. What are you talking about? Ellen, your family. This is just a misunderstanding. Is it? Tell me, Sadie, when exactly were you planning to inform me about Sunny Acres? The silence on the other end was telling. I don't know what you mean, she finally said, but her voice had lost its conviction. November 15th, Sadie. That was your target move-in date. I found your timeline. Another pause, longer this time. Ellen, you've been going through our private papers? The accusation in her voice was rich, considering what they'd been planning. I've been learning the truth about my own future, something I apparently couldn't trust my own family to tell me. Ellen, please listen to me. You're not thinking clearly. This isn't like you. And there it was. The same tactic they'd been using all along. Anytime I stood up for myself, anytime I questioned their decisions, I was confused or not thinking clearly. You're right, Sadie. This isn't like the old me. The old me would have quietly accepted whatever you decided. The old me would have let you ship me off to a nursing home while keeping the house I paid for. But the old me was a fool. Ellen, you're scaring me. And you're scaring Bella. She doesn't understand where her grandmother went. That hurt, as it was intended to. But I'd prepared for this moment. Put her on the phone. What? Put Bella on the phone. Let me talk to my granddaughter. I heard muffled conversation. Then Bella's small voice came through the phone. Grandma Ellen? Where are you? Mommy said you moved away. My heart clenched, but I kept my voice steady. Hi, sweetheart. I'm in my new apartment. It has a beautiful garden outside my window. But why did you leave? Did I do something wrong? Oh, baby, no. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions, and I decided I needed my own place to live. Can I come visit you? I looked around my small apartment, imagining Bella here, helping me tend plants on the balcony, reading books together in the rocking chair. I would love that very much. But that's something you'll need to discuss with your mommy and daddy. I heard the phone being taken away. Then Sadie's voice returned, tighter now with barely controlled anger. Ellen, you are being incredibly selfish. That little girl loves you. And I love her. Which is why I won't let her grow up thinking it's acceptable to lie to people you claim to care about, or to make plans about someone's life without including them in the conversation. We were trying to protect you. From what? From having a say in my own future. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Sadie alternating between guilt, anger, and attempts at manipulation. But I held firm. I'd made my choice and I was comfortable with it. After I hung up, I sat back in my rocking chair and watched the sun set over the garden. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Andrew and Sadie would have to figure out how to pay their mortgage without my contribution. They'd have to explain to their friends and neighbors why I'd suddenly disappeared. They'd have to face the reality of what they'd tried to do. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was going to sleep peacefully in my own bed, in my own home, where nobody was making plans about my future behind my back. It was the best feeling I'd had in years. The first week in my new apartment passed quietly, almost peacefully. I established routines that were entirely my own. Morning coffee on the small balcony, afternoon walks through the neighborhood, evening reading in my rocking chair. No one questioned my choices or monitored my activities. No one made me feel like a burden for existing. But I knew the calm wouldn't last. The storm began on Wednesday morning with a phone call from Tom Brennan. Ellen, I need to give you an update. Andrew contacted me yesterday. I set down my coffee cup and prepared myself. What did he say? He's claiming you're not mentally competent to make legal decisions. He wants to pursue guardianship proceedings to have your actions declared invalid. I felt a familiar surge of anger, but it was cleaner now, more focused. On what grounds? He's alleging that your sudden departure and financial demands are evidence of diminished capacity. He says you've become paranoid and irrational. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. The same man who was planning to commit me to a nursing home against my will is now saying I'm paranoid? Ellen, I have to ask, are you prepared for this fight? Guardianship proceedings can be ugly, and they'll drag up every small incident they can find to paint you as incompetent. I thought about Sadie's carefully documented list of my supposed memory lapses, the plates I'd deliberately put in wrong cabinets, the confusion I'd performed so convincingly. Tom, they're going to have a hard time proving I'm incompetent when I've just successfully relocated myself, established independent housing, and initiated complex legal proceedings. But yes, I'm prepared to fight. Good. Because there's something else. They've hired Patricia Wolfson. I recognized the name. Patricia Wolfson was one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in the city, known for taking on contentious guardianship cases. They're serious about this, Tom continued. But Ellen, hiring Wolfson isn't cheap. Where are they getting the money? That was an excellent question. Andrew and Sadie had been living paycheck to paycheck even with my contributions. Legal fees for a contested guardianship could easily run into tens of thousands of dollars. I think I know, I said slowly. But I need to make some phone calls to be sure. After I hung up with Tom, I spent the morning making inquiries. First, I called the mortgage company and confirmed what I suspected. Andrew and Sadie had taken out a home equity loan against the house, borrowing against the equity my payments had helped them build. Then I called my bank and requested copies of all the electronic transfers I'd made to their account over the past 3 years. I wanted documentation of every penny I'd contributed. But it was my third call that provided the most interesting information. Sunny Acres Retirement Community, this is Jennifer. Hello, Jennifer. This is Ellen Morrison. I believe my son Andrew was making arrangements for my admission. Oh, Mrs. Morrison. Yes, we've been expecting to hear from you. Are you ready to schedule your move-in date? I paused, choosing my words carefully. I'm calling because there's been a change in circumstances. I won't be needing your services after all. I see. Well, that's fine, of course. Should I return the deposit your son paid? My blood went cold. Deposit? Yes, the $5,000 deposit he paid last week to hold your room. Standard procedure for our memory care wing. Memory care wing. $5,000. Paid last week, just days before that dinner when Bella's innocent question had exposed their plans. Jennifer, just to confirm, what exactly did my son tell you about my condition? Well, he explained that you have moderate dementia with episodes of confusion and agitation. He was very concerned about your safety, and he felt the structure of our memory care program would be beneficial. I thanked Jennifer and hung up, my hands shaking with rage. They hadn't just been planning to warehouse me. They'd been planning to lock me in a memory care facility, where visitors were limited and residents had little autonomy. And they'd paid $5,000 to ensure it would happen. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. I was reading on my balcony when the building manager knocked on my door. Mrs. Morrison? There's a young woman here to see you. Says she's your granddaughter. My heart leaped. Bella. That's the name she gave. I hurried downstairs to find Bella sitting in the lobby, still wearing her school uniform, her backpack at her feet. She looked small and lost in the adult-sized furniture. Bella, sweetheart, what are you doing here? How did you get here? She looked up at me with those serious blue eyes that reminded me so much of Andrew at that age. I took the bus. I looked up your address on Daddy's computer. Does your mother know where you are? Bella shook her head, and I could see she was fighting back tears. Honey, your parents are going to be worried sick. We need to call them. I don't want to go home, she said, her voice small but determined. I want to stay with you. I knelt down beside her chair, my heart breaking for this innocent child caught in the middle of adult complications. Bella, what's happening at home? Mommy and Daddy keep fighting. They fight about money and they fight about you. Daddy says mean things about you, and when I told him to stop, he sent me to my room. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her small body trembling against mine. Last night I heard Mommy crying. she continued, her voice muffled against my shoulder. She was on the phone with someone, and she said they might have to sell our house. So it was starting. The financial pressure was building, just as I'd known it would. Sweetheart, I need you to listen to me carefully. The problems between your parents and me are grown-up problems. They're not your fault, and they're not your responsibility to fix. But I miss you, Grandma Ellen. Why can't you just come home? How could I explain to an 8-year-old that her parents had been planning to lock me away? That they'd lied about my mental state to justify their actions? That home had never really been home for me? Sometimes, Bella, people need to live in different places to be happy and healthy. I'm happy here in my new apartment. Would you like to see it? I took her upstairs and showed her around my small space. She was fascinated by the balcony garden and the view of the community below. It's pretty here, she said, pressing her nose against the glass door. It is. And you know what? You can visit me here anytime your parents say it's okay. But even as I said the words, I knew the likelihood of that happening was slim to none. We spent an hour together before I finally convinced her to let me call her parents. Sadie's voice when she answered was frantic with worry. Bella? Oh my God, Bella, where are you? She's with me, Sadie. She's safe. Ellen? How dare you take my daughter? I didn't take her. She came here on her own. She took the bus, Sadie. An 8-year-old girl took public transportation because she was so upset about what's happening at home. The silence on the other end was telling. We're coming to get her right now, Sadie finally said. Of course you are. But Sadie, when you get here, I think we need to have a conversation. A real one without lawyers or threats or manipulation. 30 minutes later, Andrew and Sadie arrived at my building. I met them in the lobby, where Bella was playing with toys I'd brought down from my apartment. Daddy! Bella ran to Andrew, who scooped her up in his arms. Don't ever scare us like that again, he said, but I could hear the relief in his voice. After Bella was settled in a corner with her coloring books, Andrew turned to me with barely controlled anger. You had no right to keep her here without calling us immediately. You're right, I agreed. Just like you had no right to make plans about my future without including me in the conversation. Sadie stepped forward, her face flushed. Ellen, this has gone far enough. Your legal demands are ridiculous. We can't pay you $79,000. You know we don't have that kind of money. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you spent $5,000 on a deposit for my memory care placement. Both of them froze. How did you know about that? Andrew asked. I called Sunny Acres, Andrew. Imagine my surprise when they told me about my moderate dementia and episodes of confusion and agitation. Mom, we were trying to help you. By lying about my mental state? By committing me to a locked facility? By stealing my home? We weren't stealing anything, Sadie protested. That house is legally ours. Built with my money, Sadie. $79,000 of my money over 3 years. Money I trusted you with because I thought I was investing in a family, not funding my own disposal. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but it was clear we were at an impasse. They maintained they'd been acting in my best interests. I maintained they'd been acting in their own financial interests. Finally, Andrew gathered up Bella's things. This isn't over, Mom. We're going to fight the guardianship petition, and we're going to win. Andrew, I said as they reached the door, I want you to remember something. I didn't start this fight. I simply refused to be a victim in it. After they left, I sat in the lobby for a long time, watching the evening light fade through the windows. The building was quiet around me, filled with other seniors who'd made their own choices about how to live their later years. I thought about Bella, caught between adults who couldn't see past their own anger and hurt. I thought about Andrew, so convinced he was in the right that he was willing to take out loans to fight me in court. I thought about Sadie, who'd probably convinced herself that locking me away was an act of kindness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The guardianship petition would move forward, and I'd have to prove my competency in court. There would be more lawyers, more bills, more family drama played out in public. But tonight I was exactly where I chose to be, surrounded by my own belongings in my own space, answerable to no one but myself. It was a small victory, but it was mine. And sometimes small victories are enough to build a new life on. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my apartment, making birthday cupcakes for my neighbor Dorothy's 75th birthday celebration. The afternoon sun streamed through my windows, illuminating the small herb garden I'd planted on the balcony. Basil, rosemary, thyme. Simple pleasures that belonged entirely to me. The guardianship petition had been dismissed 3 months ago, after what Tom Brennan later described as one of the most thorough mental competency evaluations he'd ever witnessed. The court-appointed psychiatrist had spent 2 hours with me, testing my memory, my reasoning abilities, my understanding of financial matters. I'd passed every assessment with flying colors. The judge's final words still echoed in my memory. Mrs. Morrison, you appear to be not only mentally competent, but exceptionally well-organized and thoughtful in your decision-making. This court sees no grounds for guardianship proceedings. Andrew and Sadie's attorney had looked deflated. My son had looked stunned, as if he couldn't quite believe that his elderly mother had outmaneuvered him so completely. But the legal victory, satisfying as it was, wasn't the most important thing that had happened in these past months. I'd built a life. A real life, not the shadow existence I'd been living in their house. The Sunset Manor apartments had become more than just a place to live. The community here was vibrant, full of people who'd made their own choices about how to spend their later years. Dorothy had become my closest friend, a retired teacher who shared my love of mystery novels and afternoon tea. Margaret and Bob Henderson organized weekly bridge games in the community room. Maria Santos led a gardening club that had transformed the courtyard into something beautiful. These people didn't see me as a burden or a problem to be solved. They saw me as Ellen, a person with opinions and interests in stories worth hearing. I'd also returned to work, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted the purpose. The hospital had welcomed me back to the gift shop with open arms, and I'd been promoted to volunteer coordinator, helping other retirees find meaningful ways to contribute their time and skills. The timer chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. I pulled the cupcakes from the oven, golden and perfect. As I set them on the cooling rack, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer when I saw the number. It was Patricia, Andrew's sister, calling from Denver. Hello, Patricia. Ellen, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to check on you and see how you're doing. Patricia had called me several times since the legal proceedings ended. She'd been horrified by her brother's actions and deeply apologetic about believing his lies about my mental state. I'm doing very well, thank you. How are things with you? Good. Ellen, I have to ask. Have you heard from Andrew recently? I paused in my frosting preparation. Not for about 6 weeks. Why? He called me last night. They're losing the house. I'd been expecting this news, but hearing it confirmed still created a complex mix of emotions in my chest. I see. Ellen, he wanted me to ask you something. He's wondering if you'd consider helping them one more time. Maybe working out a payment plan for what they owe you or... Patricia, I interrupted gently. What exactly did Andrew tell you about why they're losing the house? A pause. He said it was because of the legal fees from the guardianship case, and because they lost your financial contribution when you moved out. And did he mention why I moved out? Another pause, longer this time. He said there was a misunderstanding about some care arrangements. I almost laughed. Even now, facing the loss of his home, Andrew couldn't bring himself to tell the truth about what he'd done. Patricia, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, and then you can decide what advice to give your brother. Over the next 20 minutes, I told her everything. The nursing home plans, the lies about my mental state, the deposit paid to the memory care facility, the timeline they'd created for my removal. I told her about finding their budget calculations that showed exactly how much money they'd lose without me, and about Andrew's email describing me as confused and dangerous. By the time I finished, Patricia was silent. Patricia? Are you still there? I'm here. Ellen, I'm so sorry. I had no idea it was that bad. I don't want your apology, Patricia. You did nothing wrong. But I want you to understand why I can't help them now. I understand completely. In fact, I'm wondering why you're being so civil about this whole thing. That was a good question, one I've been asking myself for months. Because staying angry takes too much energy, and I'd rather spend that energy on building something positive. After we hung up, I finished frosting the cupcakes and headed downstairs to Dorothy's party. The community room was decorated with streamers and balloons, filled with laughter and conversation. Dorothy sat in the center of it all, wearing a tiara someone had brought as a joke, beaming with joy. "Ellen, those cupcakes look beautiful," she called out as I entered. I set them on the dessert table and joined the celebration. We played party games that would have seemed silly in any other context but felt perfectly natural here. We sang happy birthday off-key but with enthusiasm. We told stories and shared memories and laughed until our sides ached. This was what family was supposed to feel like, I realized. Not obligation and guilt and walking on eggshells. Not being tolerated as long as you were useful. This was what it meant to be valued for who you were, not what you could provide. Later that evening, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Bella. "Grandma Ellen, I miss you. Can I visit you soon?" My heart clenched. I'd seen Bella only twice since that day she'd taken the bus to my apartment. Both visits had been arranged through Patricia, who'd driven in from Denver specifically to facilitate them. Andrew and Sadie hadn't attended either visit. I typed back, "I miss you too, sweetheart. I hope we can visit soon." But I knew the reality. Bella was caught in the middle of an adult conflict she didn't understand. Andrew and Sadie saw my relationship with her as leverage, something they could control to try to manipulate me back into their lives on their terms. I'd made my peace with that painful truth. I would always love Bella, but I couldn't save her from learning the difficult lesson that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you most. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. "Ellen, this is Sadie. Please call me. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to talk about. They'd made their choices and I'd made mine. A soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Dorothy stood in the hallway, still wearing her birthday tiara. "I brought you a piece of cake," she said, holding out a plate. "And I wanted to thank you again for the cupcakes. They were perfect." "You're welcome. Did you have a good birthday?" "The best one in years." She settled into the chair beside me on the balcony. "Ellen, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Walking away from your family like you did?" It was a question I'd asked myself countless times over the past months. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that my son became the kind of person who could plan to warehouse his mother for his own convenience. I regret that my granddaughter has to live with parents who taught her that love is conditional on usefulness." I paused, watching a couple walk hand in hand through the courtyard below. But do I regret choosing my own dignity over their comfort? Do I regret refusing to be a victim of their greed and manipulation? No, Dorothy. I don't regret that at all. She nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Because you've inspired a lot of people here, you know. The way you handled yourself, the way you stood up for your rights. Margaret was telling me yesterday that you gave her the courage to finally tell her son that she won't be lending him any more money for his failed business ventures." I smiled at that. Margaret's son had been taking advantage of her generosity for years, always with promises to pay her back that never materialized. "We're not doormats, Dorothy. We're not obligated to accept poor treatment just because we're getting older." "Exactly." She stood up, adjusting her tiara. "Well, I should let you get some rest. But Ellen, thank you. For the cupcakes, for the friendship, and for showing us all what it looks like to choose yourself." After she left, I remained on the balcony, finishing my tea as the night settled around me. Somewhere across town, Andrew and Sadie were probably having another fight about money, about blame, about what they were going to do next. Bella was probably lying in bed wondering why her family had fallen apart, why her grandmother had disappeared from her daily life. I felt sad for all of them, but I no longer felt responsible for fixing their problems. I'd learned something important over these past months. You can't love people into treating you well. You can't sacrifice yourself into being valued. And you can't be patient enough, understanding enough, or generous enough to change someone who's determined to see you as less than you are. What you can do is choose yourself. Choose your dignity, your peace of mind, your right to live without constantly defending your worth. I'd made that choice, and despite everything I'd lost in the process, I'd gained something invaluable. I'd gained myself back. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked around my small apartment with deep satisfaction. Every item here was something I'd chosen, something that brought me joy or comfort, or served a purpose in my carefully constructed new life. Tomorrow I would wake up in my own bed, in my own home, accountable to no one but myself. I would spend my day doing things that mattered to me, with people who valued my company. I would make decisions about my own life without having to consider whether they inconvenienced anyone else. At 69 years old, I was finally living the life I wanted instead of the life others expected me to accept. And that, I thought as I turned off the lights, was worth every difficult day that had brought me here.